So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. So we are, as always, we're recording this program, and we have some people that joined us online through the webinar. We'll probably have some people join us. And with today's program, I am really excited to talk about this one, just because it's one of those things I've been reading a lot about recently, and like we're always trying to discover and understand new things, and it's just like a cool topic. It's a little bit different than other things we've talked about in the past, because I mean, you come to our programs because we think about plants, right? So we're going to get a little crazy today, and we're going to go a little bit different direction in our taxonomy. Today's program is called the Wood Wide Web, and it's a really cool understanding that we have of what's happening within the environment, within the ecosystem, but the science is constantly evolving with it and our understanding of what this Wood Wide Web really is. For everybody that's online, you can put any of your questions that you have in the chat box. I can see those. And as well as any questions that are asked with an audience that's in person, I'll make sure I relay that to everybody. So, and again, this is already recording, and I'll put it up on our YouTube channel so you all can go back at any time. And everybody that's registered with the program, I'll make sure that I send out follow-up emails with a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, any other relevant resources pertaining to our discussion today. So thanks everybody for joining us. So when you think of, have any of you heard of the Wood Wide Web, that term before? I see a lot of no's. That's cool. So when we jump into this discussion of what the Wood Wide Web is, that all sound familiar, the World Wide Web. There's a reason it's called that. So the Wood Wide Web is really thinking about what mycorrhizal connections are. So we'll talk about, well, what on earth is mycorrhizae? And we'll talk a little bit about that. And it's kind of a really cool thing, because the analogy that a lot of scientists have begun to use, this Wood Wide Web, starts to make a lot of sense as we dive into this, because you'll think of it as that context of thinking about the internet and the World Wide Web. But we're looking at how this kind of network is existing within our environment. So, which makes it really cool. So, again, my name is Taylor Clem. I'm the County Extension Director, Master Gardener Volunteer Horticulture and Horticulture Agent. So everyone in this room knows me. I know everybody in this room. So I'll skip a lot of the main introductions. So happy Wednesday. I think today's Wednesday. As we're starting with the new year, I've kind of lost, I don't know where I'm at anymore. So as part of today's discussion, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about what this Wood Wide Web is. So we'll have a little introduction, and there's a video I'm going to send you all as a follow-up to this that came from PBS, just like on YouTube. And it's like to explain this concept to kids also, but for a 3-minute video, it hits the nail on the head to kind of just give you a brief introduction. So I'll send that to you all also, but we'll cover an introduction of, what these mycelial networks might be and what it is. So, and we could put in the context of nature's Ethernet cables. So y'all know what Ethernet cables are, all the little plugs and cables that you're using to hook up your computer to the internet. Plug them into the wall, or we have Wi-Fi now, most part, but plants don't have Wi-Fi, kind of. There's some really cool research that's making people ask some really cool questions. But nonetheless, we'll talk about like transmitting data. So when we think about the internet, we're transmitting and sending data back and forth constantly. Plants do the same thing. And that's how this Wood Wide Web network really is. And then we'll talk about the cool stuff, is how can we benefit from this? So I'll skip this video I'm going to send you. But what is mycorrhizae? So the Wood Wide Web essentially is a vast network of mycorrhizal networks. It's just this mycorrhizal species, or this mycorrhizal interactions. And what it is it's essentially not necessarily a symbiotic relationship, but it is the relationship between fungi and roots. So imagine right now, when you're walking around your landscape out in a natural area, think about what's happening below your feet within the soil. It's not just you have roots, and then you have fungi, you have protists, you have all these little fun things. But think about, they all interact. So when you're walking around outside, especially in the natural areas where we see a lot of this more dense, see these mycorrhizal networks. And this mycorrhizae, this term, myco is that Greek word for fungus, and rhizae is translates from root. So essentially, mycorrhizae translates to fungus root. That's how it relates. So when we talk about mycorrhizal networks, we're talking about this vast network of where fungi and roots all interact with one another. And what we find really, really interesting is we start to see that one tree might be connected to a shrub, might be connected to some agriculture field. And it's this vast, vast network where everything's connected in this interrelated network underneath our feet that we can't necessarily see. So this mycorrhizae, this acts like that wood wide web, this interaction of this fungus and roots. They are essentially the Ethernet cables of everything connecting all this plant material together, the fungi. They transmit data, essentially, and we'll talk more about that. Is what is this data that's transmitted? Why is it important? Because when we think about relationships of things, we think about like symbiotic relationships, parasitic relationships. What we're kind of starting to see is this relationships in these mycorrhizal networks. If you're familiar with it, sometimes you hear about the really fun, happy part of it, but it's also, it can get very, very dark as well. So fungi, as well as other like protists, these single cellular microorganisms or multicellular microorganisms have the ability to create these very complex, efficient connections. So it's not just like a chaotic branching of fungi or, you know, in some situations, like in this example, this is slime mold, which isn't a fungus, but we see it grow and spread and it creates a very efficient connection. So in nature, we're looking for optimization of efficiency. So you think about a plant that's trying to photosynthesize. Well, we know that plants and trees will drop limbs and leaves and branches and all sorts of stuff. If that tree might think that branch does not cut it's not cutting it, it'll drop it. You know, it's like, I'm going to get rid of these leaves because they're taking too much and not providing enough. So we see this in nature of like, how do we optimize the efficiency of our different plant material? And fungi, protists, they all do the same thing. So in this image that you see, it's kind of a time series from left to right, A, B, C, D, E, F. You can kind of see at that center, that little yellow dot. Do we need to turn off the lights so y'all can see that a little bit better? Okay, that little yellow dot you see is a slime mold. Kind of like someone just boop, put it down on there. And that white line that you see surrounding everything, that's just like a boundary. Have any of you seen this before? Cool. I like this. And that's kind of like a border. And then all those little dots, that's oatmeal. So what we can see is this slime mold, it's like, I need to find something that I can consume, and it begins to grow outwards. And you can see it has this like initiation phase where it spreads until it finds a food source. It locks onto it and then starts to kill off everything that's not finding that food source. And at the end of it, after 26 hours, there is actually a slime mold network of what is considered the most efficient connection of all of these dots. And I have a video of it. I have to do one change on Zoom real quick to make sure it actually works well. So let me do this real quick. Yeah, that's just oatmeal. So there's some really other cool examples where they'll put slime mold or even a fungus at one end of the maze, and the fungus will grow and it'll find its way to the other end of the maze because it can find the most optimum route to get to the food source at the end. The shortest distance possible. It has an initiation phase where it fills up the maze. Once it finds that optimal efficiency moving through the maze, it'll kill off everything else and only have that most direct route. Cool. Yeah. So I know. So let me hit play on this. And this is actually the video of that imagery. If you can't see this online, let me know. You should be able to. There's no sound. Well, look at it grow. See how that's growing out? And you can kind of see it's that initiation phase, and it has these like little branches, and it's connecting and optimizing that growth from source to source. And then slowly you can see as it reaches the end or it's running out of sources, it starts to kill off anything that's not able to find that source. It's sending those nutrients, that food, that sugar all throughout the slime mold. And look how now this network that has created itself. Cool, right? I know.
That's on the floor.
Now you can see why this is a cool thing. So what was the question that you had?
Is that good stuff for the ground?
So is slime mold good for the ground? Yeah. Slime mold we get calls about all the time. It's like, oh, cool. Also has the name dog vomit. Yeah. So slime mold, slime mold is benign, but it's one of those things you see in the landscape. It freaks you out, but it'll be gone in like a couple hours anyways. They don't last too long.
Oh, okay.
So when we go back and we look at these images or that video, there's a reason why it was set up this way. Like why those food dots were in that spot, why that white boundary is there, and why the slime mold was placed in that spot. So one of the most efficient transportation networks in the world is in Japan. The Tokyo Regional Transportation Network is the most efficient network in the world. It was recognized as the most efficient network in the world. This slime mold, that yellow dot, that's Tokyo. All the little food dots around it, those are major hubs around Tokyo, like population centers. And in this study, that almost perfectly aligns with that Tokyo regional network because it is able to find that most efficient pattern. And you heard me mention that it has to do with also talking about the like that maze, solving maze. They have the ability to find that most efficient way through. So I saw a recent study someone posted, and it was like, there's this blog I follow of failed science experiments, and it's really funny. Someone was doing a slime mold experiment, and the slime mold started climbing up and over the maze, not staying inside. It was like, and then the joke was that was the day slime mold discovered the third dimension. And then someone said tomorrow they're going to be discovering the concept of time. So, but nonetheless, it's that efficiency and connections. So we think of ourselves as creating networks that are efficient, but nature is wildly good at it. And we're seeing this not necessarily just within slime mold, which is a fungus, but we're seeing this in our mycorrhizal networks. We're looking for efficiency. We're looking at efficiency and connections because all of a sudden what we're starting to see is a connection between those plants, those roots, and that fungi, and they looking for that efficient connection. So when we start to talk about fungus, do all fungi have the ability to form these mycorrhizal relationships? And if you can speak French, King Philip says, nope, it's not true. Not all fungi have the ability to form mycorrhizal connections because a lot of fungi is unicellular. So to talk about these different types of fungi that has the ability to create mycorrhizal networks, let's jump into our high school biology a little bit. So you all remember Dear King, well, you probably learned another way, but Dear King Philip came over for good soup. So as plant nerds, MGVs, plant nerds, plant enthusiasts, whatever you might want to say, we usually kind of stick within this taxonomic classifications where we stick with just, we're in the plant kingdom, and then we talk about the plant families and then genus and species. So for example, like a red maple, it's in the plant kingdom, right? So, and then its family, there's soapberry, Sapindaceae, or Sapindaceae, depending on who you ask on how to pronounce that. That's the family. And then the the genus is Acer and the species is Rubrum. So that's when we're talking about that taxonomic classification. So essentially the scientific fancy names of plants. because we do know that common names, well, they're common names. You can have 1,000 common names for one plant, but the scientific term or the scientific name that we use in taxonomy, that is the very specific name for that plant. So when we think, so like in that red maple, we think of it's a plant kingdom. Sapindaceae, Acer rubrum is that red maple. So we're talking about fungi, we got to jump and we got to look at it a little bit differently. So when we look at these Nature's Ethernet cables, we're thinking about mycorrhizal networks and fungi. We obviously start thinking, you know, when we go to the very top order, there's domain, and that's eukarya, and that's where multiple cells have the ability to kind of come together. But then there's the kingdom, and there's 4 different kingdoms, and this is where we all of a sudden we're in a completely different world. So this is the highest order of classification on life in the universe or on the world. And in that kingdom, there's protists, there's fungi, there's the plants and animal kingdoms, right? So when we're thinking about fungi, we're going to be in that fungus kingdom. I'm getting tongue-tied. But there's bazillions of types of fungi, and we're discovering new ones all the time. So getting to that scale all the way down, where we're starting to think about like the family, et cetera, it can get too complicated. Or it can get very complicated. So typically we'll talk about phylum. So that next order down, higher order, and there's 5 different types of fungi phylum, generally recognized. Some, depending on who you ask, it could be 3, others could say it'd be 7. But these 5 phylum are the ones that we generally recognize as the different phylums within the kingdom. One moment, please. Okay. My little camera stuff went away, so I don't know if everyone online can see me or not. But anyways, so there's these different phylums, and that's kind of where we classify them. And of the 5 phylums, 3 of them are or have that ability to create these mycorrhizal connections. And it is estimated there's over 25,000 fungal species that form mycorrhizal networks. So that's a lot. Estimated, because we don't know. We're not 100% sure. So to briefly go over these, there are the 5 phylums, 3 of which have the ability to create mycorrhizal networks. So simply put, there's the Ascomycota, which is just sac fungi. There's the Basidiomycota, which is also just called club fungi, as well as there's the Glomerulophycota. So that Glomerulomycota, that is specifically kind of like a newer phylum of fungi that they can't exist unless they have a mycorrhizal connection. If they don't have that mycorrhizal connection, what do you think happens to them? They die. So that's kind of like one of the main classifications or characteristics of that phylum. So some of the things that we can recognize as these fungi that we may know, like the sac phylum, like a morel mushroom, that's a sac phylum. And a club. Have you all heard of lion's mane before? That's another example of a fungi. So I'm sorry, one of those club phylums, but that lion's mane, it's really cool because that one grows really well around here. Usually around this time of year, maybe a little bit earlier, walking around, look up like 8 to 12 feet. And on like oak trees, like laurel and water oaks, I think you can see it really well on. It looks like this giant mass, like white mass. It looks like a giant softball, but it gets lion's mane because it literally looks like these little tentacle things hanging all over it, like it looks like a lion's mane. And guess what? It's delicious. So you can actually buy it and you can grow it at your home really easy. And it tastes just like crab meat, has the same texture. So you can make crab cakes. And if you had a guest come over and they ate it, they would have no clue if they're eating a lion's mane mushroom. But it's pretty sought after too, because people will buy it and they use it in pharmaceutical industry. You can get lion's mane capsules at like nutrition stores, etc. But anyways, so those are some of the examples, just to put it in context of some that you know or have seen. So let's talk about, just generally like what is a mushroom? or what is a fungi? So when you see a mushroom in your yard, how many times do you think it was like, well, that's just it? It's not. The mushroom that you see is the fruiting body of that fungi. So think of it as the apple to the apple tree. So you see this fruiting body pop up in your yard. That is just the fruit. Underneath you in the ground or in the plant material that it's growing on, it has a system of mycelium. And mycelium is growing and it's breaking down substances, it's absorbing nutrients and water. And it's just, that's what it uses to kind of grab all what it needs to help grow. And then that mycelium is just comprised of hyphae. Hyphae, these single fungal filaments. And when they come together, they create mycelium, which is these like mycelial networks that we use for mycorrhizal connections. So that mycelium is what ends up, and that hyphae is what actually ends up directly interacting with the roots of plants. So when we look at what we call this, at the different types of mycelium, we can actually see it in our landscapes and in our soils. So the most common one that we see, you've probably seen this before, you're digging and you see these like white filamenty looking things. Those are what we call mycelial cords. So that's that mycelium, all that network kind of growing throughout the soil, looking for things to connect to, looking for nutrients it can absorb into its network. But we also have these really cool things. Oh yeah, question. Great question. So if we just destroy that mushroom, that fruiting body, will that mycelium continue to thrive? In essence, yes, but not always, because the reason is sometimes you'll see that fruiting body develop once it started, like some fungi are going to be breaking down and decomposing some material. So once it kind of runs out of things it can consume, it may fruit and then release spores. But typically, if it's just in your yard and you knock it over, you're not going to be killing the hyphae or that actual mycorrhizal or mycelium. So we see these are these mycelial cords. So that's a common one. Have any of you seen this in your garden, in your landscape, when you're tilling, moving things around? If you're walking around in a natural area and you get down low and you like see a dead log and you pull back part of the bark that's falling apart, you'll see this underneath there. Yeah. But we also have these really cool things called a rhizomorph. It sounds really, it's like a cool name. Sounds like some weird, like a Marvel character. I'm rhizomorph. But it looks like a plant root. Some of them look like a plant root, and what's really, really cool is they're hollow. They look like straws. It's almost like these waterproof straw things that are stretching through the landscape or through the soil, and they think of them as conduits or pipes. They absorb moisture, they can bring in nutrients from the soil, and it just flows through that rhizomorph. And those mycelial cords do the same thing, but this is like hollow, like a straw, and it moves like a little channel. It's really cool. I've seen this maybe a couple times, but the mycelial cords you see more of. So, but anyway, so those are different ways that we can kind of see this fungi kind of like moving in and around the soil. Yes?
Are they on a roof?
That's actually on a log in that image. So, because like I know people like they're digging and they find these things are like hollow roots. It's not a root. That's actually that rhizomorph. So it's a cool thing. So when we have these different, this fungal network kind of spreading through our soil, we have to think about how it ends up connecting with the actual roots themselves. So they end up having all sorts of different connections with the roots in the plant. But can all mycelial, like fungi, do you think connects to every single plant? If you're a fungi that can create these mycelial networks, can they all interact with any plant? No, exactly. Some of these different specific connections that we'll talk about have very specific plant families that they can connect with. And some plant families have no ability to create these mycorrhizal networks. One example is the brassica family. So y'all like broccoli, like some of the most, so like some of the most common plants that we might grow in our raised beds, if they're brassica, they may not be able to create these mycorrhizal connections. So these mycorrhizal connections interact between the fungi and the roots, that mycorrhizal network. And then that kind of like area within the soil where this kind of dance and intertwining, commingling of all the fungi and the roots, we actually call that the rhizosphere. Like generally it's that area where the roots are kind of interacting with the fungi and the other organisms within the soil. So just like all of us, when you're thinking about the internet, we have different ways that we can connect to the internet, right? So, we all remember our day, we were all just constantly getting our America Online CDs in the mail that we can hook up, those phone line connections. Then we have, so many different carriers like Earthlink, Cox, AT&T, Comcast, all these different types of connections that we can actually use to access the internet. Plants do the same thing, which is really cool. There's so many different types of connections that the fungi form with plants, but those connections can only exist with specific plant families. So we kind of classify it into two major classifications: endomycorrhizae and ectomycorrhizae. Endo, think about inside. Those connections, that endomycorrhizae actually penetrates the cellular walls of the roots and actually gets inside the cells. Ecto, outside. They stay outside the plant cells themselves, but they can still work their way into the root. So we have those two major classifications, endo and ecto. And within these endo connections, there's one, the most common one is called arbuscular. It's like an arbuscular mycorrhizae connection. And it has the ability to, I said plant families earlier, I'm sorry, I meant plant taxa. But like the arbuscular mycorrhizae is the most common mycorrhizal network that we can see within the globe, with all over the world. And it has the ability to connect with some gymnosperms, angiosperms. But then in these endomycorrhizae connections, there's one that's specifically the orchid mycorrhizae, which it's a connection that only exists with orchids. And if I remember reading correctly, in order for a orchid to propagate and grow in the wild, it needs this connection because it's part of that way to get it to the seeds to actually germinate. Without it, they can't germinate. So I want to talk a little bit about what these connections are. It's small in here. Let me see if I can make this larger real quick. I want to make sure y'all can see it. Yeah. All. From my understanding, but I'll double check that it's all orchids. So I just zoomed in so y'all can see it because it seemed really tiny in here. But this at the top, that's ectomycorrhizae. So we're looking at a cross section of a root in this image. And those little red dots that we can see all right here within this space, you can see they're not actually penetrating the cell walls, but they work their way in between the cells. And they create actually what's called an Hartig net or Hartig net. And it's essentially that forms this net around the cell. So you can see how it's staying outside the cells. But then we have the arbuscular mycorrhizae, which I'll put right here. That stays, that will actually penetrate. It doesn't have that Hartig net, but it penetrates directly into the cells. And there's these different things that happen. So you have the fungi come in, that hyphae come in, it can penetrate the cells, and it has these different components to it. So there's this one portion that's right here in this section. It's called the arbuscule. And that arbuscule is actually, think about your lungs. The hyphae penetrate the cell and it becomes a location where nutrients and water all kind of exchange within the cell. It's this moment of exchange. We also have inside there what's called a vestibule. And that is almost like a storage container, kind of like the hyphae move in and becomes a place where they can store nutrients, water, sugar, etc. Some of the other connections, like with that orchid or the ericoid mycorrhizae, something like ericoid, something that we see with like blueberries, they have special things called pelotons, not to be confused with the bicycle, but they have pelotons where it's actually the hyphae kind of like, whoop, it gets into the cell and it kind of coils up in this bundle of hyphae, and then eventually it gets separated, kind of like degrades. But there's still a lot of understanding of like, yes, that arbuscule where it kind of like looks like the bronchioles of a lung, and the vestibule, it's like we believe that that's what is happening, is like those locations are where the exchange is happening within those cells of the roots, but there's not 100% understanding of like how or why, etc. So these are the different types of connections that can exist. So imagine, so there's these main connections like endo and ecto, but they can only form connections with very specific plant taxa. So all of a sudden we're looking at this really cool balance of what type of plant species you have, what type of fungi is available, what type of connection can they make. Don't worry, there will not be a test on any of these terms because they're hard to pronounce. So these are these Ethernet cables. So it's like these different types of connections that can exist within this mycorrhizal network. So now I want us to jump to what I call the good stuff. Let me make sure. Okay, so this is kind of like the cool thing. So it's like, okay, Taylor, we've learned about in this wood wide web, there is this balance, this connection between plant material and fungi. Mycorrhizal network, mycorrhiza, the root, fungus root, that connection. And in these connections, it's like, okay, let's move data around. What kind of data do you think would be moving around in the world of plants and fungi? I mentioned it, nutrients, right? Sugar, it could be water, etc. Say it again? No nematodes. Really cool thing is, speaking of nematodes with mycorrhizal networks, hyphae, they eat nematodes. Yeah, you can. So say that again. Oh, are they passing information about where they are? We'll talk about that. So in these systems, essentially, you know, when we think about these mycorrhizal networks, like you can kind of see in this image, it's like you have one tree and another tree. Those trees can connect with these mycorrhizal networks, and they can send and share information and data. So from a 1,000-foot view, what we can see is you have plants. It's like, say I'm a tree and I have my offspring. I want them to be protected underneath my shade, hang out with me so they can grow. But they may not get all the sugars that they need. They may not be able to photosynthesize enough. But I got this really cool mycorrhizal network. It's like, I'm your mama tree. I'm going to send you nutrients and water and sugar through this mycorrhizal network. Or you have a jerk of a tree that says, hey, I don't like you. I'm going to send toxins through here that will kill you. So that's one of the things. It's like, you know, one of the specialists with UF, I was talking one time about mycorrhizal networks, and he goes, everyone thinks of mycorrhizal networks as like this happy, wonderful world, but it is chaotic and crazy and dark and sinister, and it's very true. It seems very lovey-dovey, but then it's like there's a dark side to it too. So because even some trees, it's like, I may not send toxins, but like I'll even steal from you too. It's like, hey, you're doing really cool there. I'm going to steal from you so I can be happy. So it's important to think that in these networks, we're seeing good and bad, but in these networks, we're seeing transmission of data. And even going back to the nematode discussion, there is some data in science that we see that if a tree is like, hey, I'm being attacked by a pest, I'm going to send up chemical signals through this mycorrhizal network to kind of sound the alarm for everybody around me. And you'll see the defenses of those plants, even though they may not have that pest, you'll see their defenses raise. So they start putting up guard, even though they're not being affected, but we're seeing that communication through at a chemical level. So same thing with like something like nematodes, or, say something with like pine bark beetle, whatever it might be, some trees have that ability to communicate through that network to sound the alarm to a certain extent, not necessarily just send nutrients. So it's kind of a cool thing. So did you know trees like this, plants like this, communicated like this? Yeah, imagine walking around and this is all happening below your feet. It's cool. Talking about the information highway that's been going on for billions of years. So, but there's different ways that we can look about this, going back and looking at what this transmission is. So a lot of this relationship is, do fungi have the ability to photosynthesize? No, they can't. They can't produce their own sugars. Kind of like, trees can though. So what we start seeing is this fungi within the soil or within these mycorrhizal networks, essentially they create efficiency and optimization. Looking at a root that is connected with all this hyphae within this mycorrhizal network, it significantly expands the reach of that root system. So it has the ability to increase or bring in more moisture for the plants, absorb more nitrogen and phosphorus and other elements, and deliver them to the plant material. So you'll see the fungi all kind of like sending all these nutrients and water up to the plant material that they're connected with. And in exchange, the tree says, thanks, man, let me give you some sugar. So they send dextrose and other carbohydrates back to that network for the mycelium in order to grow, etc. So, but we also have that transmission of plant to plant, like I mentioned, where it has the ability. I think someone was at the door. Can we open it? We have the ability to send nutrients from plant to plant. So, like I mentioned, is like we can send it to other trees within the stand, offspring, etc. And as well as it has the ability to send some sugars as well. So you're seeing things go fungi to plant, plant to plant, whether good or bad, of course. But then we start to think, cool, all right, how does that impact us beyond just with this natural environment? And we can look at things about like arbuscular mycorrhizae and NPK, so nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So imagine we had an agriculture field. It's next to tree line, and we're growing something like peanuts, which we grow a lot of peanuts in Florida, if you didn't know. Not in Nassau County, but the Swanee River Valley, we're peanut growers. But imagine that you had an arbuscular mycorrhizal connection between a natural area and your ag field in this hypothetical peanuts. What's really cool is something like peanuts, it's a nitrogen fixing plant. So it has the ability to grab nitrogen from the atmosphere, bring it down to the root system, so then the peanut can have it. But then guess what? Whoop, that peanut can take some of the nitrogen and send it out to other plants, other peanuts in the field, or maybe even other trees or plants in the surrounding natural areas. And also in exchange, guess what? It can come back too. So that mycorrhizal arbuscular network could be sending that some nutrients and water into that field as well. So we can benefit from this, right? But one of the big things is if we over-till a lot of our soils, it's easy for us to break these connections. So we're doing a lot of research. There's being a lot of research. A lot of research is being done on having a better understanding about how we could facilitate these connections to make sure that we can benefit from it, not just in natural areas, but in production, or not just in agriculture, but how can we benefit it from in our own personal gardens as well? So these are these things that we're starting to learn more and do more research about. We don't have best management practices recommendations from UF to say this is how you introduce these mycorrhizal networks into your landscape, but those questions exist and people are looking at them, which is really cool.
So if you have mushrooms growing,
Mm-hmm.
it's not
So if we have mushrooms growing in our garden, no, it does not necessarily mean it is a bad thing. So some are parasitic and they do lead to some issues. Like an example of a sac fungi is the black spot for roses. So you obviously don't want that one. But so there are a lot of our fungi, and majority of them are actually very beneficial to have. So just like a lot of our IPM strategies that we do, identification is the first step to management. Because a lot of times we can react and try to apply fungicides, but what we're applying to may potentially be very beneficial for us to have. So a lot of times when we're seeing things break down material in our yard and landscape, I say leave it, let it be, because more than likely that's a really good thing, because that fungi, a lot of time, if it's mycorrhizal network, cool, or sometimes it's going to be breaking down a lot of that dead and plant material and helping build your soil health. So fungi is a good thing. Only a handful can cause some problems. Good question. How does a fairy ring grow? I can't remember exactly if it's completely circular, but yeah, it's that hyphal network is spreading within the soil, and you'll see, and as it radiates out, you'll see that it starts to create that fruiting body in that big circular pattern. Now, of course, fairy ring in turf grass is not a very fun thing, so that's one that we would have to manage. Yes. Oh, leave it be. That stinkhorn mushroom, it's, other than smelling horrible, it is a great plant. It's a great fungus to have. So when I first started working in extension, I had one time bloom outside my office window. Yeah. It looked beautiful, but my office smelled a little stinky for a couple of days. But that's a great example of one that's helping. It's just the fruiting body, and it's just breaking down a lot of that decomposing material, helping decompose a lot of that plant material. So that, an example, that's a great, although it's stinky, it's a great mushroom. It's a great fungus to have in your landscape. So just stinky, very stinky. So there are plants that smell worse than that, but that's a pretty stinky one. But anyways, so going back to this is like, you can have the nutrients and water all shifting around and moving around, and also as well as the sugars and carbohydrates to help all the plants grow. So it's kind of semi-mutualistic, sometimes not so much. So we do have some data that kind of shows what are the benefits of having this data transfer, this movement of items around this mycorrhizal network. Well, we do know that with these mycorrhizal networks that we can have an increased availability of nitrogen, phosphorus, zinc, manganese, and copper for plants. Imagine it's bringing in for plants. It's helping with potential nutrient deficiencies, but also helping with the efficiency of nutrient use within the soil. Increased pathogen resistance. Cool. Increased drought tolerance, because all of a sudden you're having this network that can pull moisture from every tiny nook and cranny that a root by itself cannot get. Higher transplant success. Cool. Yeah. Increased crop yield with enhanced flowering, as well as improved soil structure. So promoting and trying to build a healthy soil and trying to encourage mycorrhizal networks is going to be one of those things that we start to talk about more and more in the future, because as gardeners, these are all things you want, right? If I can have a landscape that's more successful, that's more drought tolerant, more pathogen resistant, has increased optimization of an uptake of nutrients, heck yeah, I want that. So it's important to think that we're seeing this exist already. Now it's just like, how can we apply it in a new way where we can do it within our landscapes, within our gardens? And you can actually go to the store and you can buy soil amendments that have fungi within them to help encourage these mycorrhizal networks to grow in your soil. How successful are they? Verdict's kind of out. But you can see that the market is already there and people are selling it. So how, yeah. Mm-hmm. So mushroom compost, I have to pull up the data. I cannot remember this one thing. So mushroom compost does not help with mycorrhizae at all, mycorrhizal connection, because none of it is active spores or anything like that. You can use it, but I cannot. It helps with, I believe, drought tolerance, but there is an issue if you use too much of it. I'd have to look it up. I cannot remember what that is off the top of my head. That's like, it's cool to use, but there are limits to it that can have an impact on plants. Some reason I think it has to do with soil pH, but I'll see if I can find it and I'll send it out to everybody. It was something I discovered, I think, during our Master Gardener volunteer training. Did some of you bring that up? Does that sound familiar? Okay, fair enough. I'll look it up. So how connected are we? So back in 2018? No, 2019. So not too long ago, a whole team of researchers all decided, hey, how connected are our mycorrhizal networks? So when I say a whole team of researchers from all over the world worked on this, and they mapped our global mycorrhizal networks based off of plant taxa. So they looked global species distribution and were able to determine where we could see these different types of connections. So that includes, the endo and ecto and all the different, arbuscular, ericoid, ecto, arbuta, mono, and orchid. So I know those are all very specific ones, but they mapped all that out. And let's look at them. They made maps. It was really cool. So here's our arbuscular mycorrhizae. So what you're looking at is in the spectrum of color, the darker the blue, the more percent biomass over land. So more plants in that specific plant taxa. So when we're looking at the global distribution, there is a lot of our arbuscular mycorrhizae. That is our most common mycorrhizal connection that we see within the world. So looking at just general ecto mycorrhizal, we can see how that distribution is occurring. And obviously, when you're looking at some of these like desert areas, you're not really seeing anything. So it's not really surprising where you're seeing the most activity. I mean, if we go back to arbuscular, I mean, you can easily find the Amazon. So, but anyway, so there's the ecto ericoid. So you can actually see that distribution is only really existing in very specific parts of the world. Seeing it even in like this ericoid, it's hard to see, but in like South Florida, Central South Florida, it's like these type of connections can't really exist unless we specifically try to make them occur. So, and then in the world where we can actually see non-mycorrhizal connections based off of plant taxa. So when we think about these mycorrhizal networks, it's not something that we just see here and there. We're seeing connections that can expand thousands and thousands of acres. So actually one of the largest living species in the world, sometimes we think of pando, the stand of quaking aspens up in North America. That's not the case. The largest species or living thing that we have in the world is actually a fungi. It's a parasitic fungi, but it's like 100 square miles, ginormous. It's up in the Northeast as well. But when we think about these mycorrhizal connections, it's not something that happens here and there. It's happening everywhere within our soils. Whole plant stands, whole plant communities, whole ecosystems can have these running and moving throughout the soil, kind of creating this optimization and efficiency and movement of nutrients, moisture, and it helps protect those trees, can allow them to be stronger in the landscape. So these mycorrhizal connections, like I mentioned, we're learning more about it. There's whole teams of mycologists and ecologists that are doing a lot of research and studying, but it's just really cool to start to think about that, this Wood Wide Web, understanding it is actually, we've understood how it existed for years and years. But we're really starting to tap the tip of the iceberg with more research of understanding what it's capable of doing, which is really cool. Because if we can start looking at how we can use these to benefit us from like bioremediation, how can we use this in agriculture? How can we use this in general gardening of our landscapes for best management practices in post-construction? So it kind of helps start to make us think the importance of soil and the value that we can have in that connection of fungi and plants in our environment to our benefit. And that's the Wood Wide Web. And references. You don't have to read those. So we now have some time for questions. Anybody online can put some questions in the chat box. I'll make sure I relay everything as much as possible. Yeah. How would fertilizer affect that process? I don't know the 100% of it, but it's not going to have an impact necessarily. Like if you apply fertilizer, it's not going to impact necessarily the fungi itself. Now you could see something maybe as a result of like nitrogen burn that you would see in your other plant material as a result of too much at one point. Yeah. So, yeah.
There was a wonderful novel that came out a few years ago, the Overstory by Richard Towers, which goes into the detrimental effect on the environment from destroying parts of this network that we, as developers and builders, haven't taken into account. So I think it is important for this to kind of get out there and for all of us, everyone, to understand that when you cut down a tree, it may not just be that tree, it may be 100 more trees that are affected.
Absolutely. So to relay that response is, what was the name of the book again?
The Overstory.
The Overstory is a book that talks about the impacts of like how development can impact these ecosystems, these mycorrhizal networks, and fragment. When we talk about habitat fragmentation, this is another example of habitat fragmentation where we can separate, and that book kind of talks a little bit about that. There's a few other really cool books that go into more detail about this, like The Mother Tree, I think is the name of one of them. One that I've read is called Entangled Life. That one's a really cool one. But I can send you all those resources. But yeah, it's knowing that and having a stronger understanding of it. We're looking at more ways at how can we think about our interaction with our environment to make sure that we are helping with these benefits. So like a great example is a lot of our UF researchers are looking at with new home construction. How are we amending soils at the very beginning to help build and enhance soil quality in a degraded environment, to help rebuild it? And we see, you know, just by doing basic amendments, we see plant health improve. So, you know, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those mycorrhizal connections exist in those, but that leads to that question of what's next? What can also be part of this equation?
In the maritime forest, I would imagine that there would be a lot of mycorrhizal.
Yeah, so in our maritime forest over on Amelia Island, yes, we'll definitely have mycorrhizal networks that exist there. So like all of our pine flatwoods around the county, we're gonna have mycorrhizal connections there. It's pretty much everywhere. It really is. It's just a matter of what is the mycorrhizal connection that you'll see in that community, and it relates to that plant taxa. But our muscular is the most common.
And it's hardening the soil. Don't want to break it down either. Color.
Yeah. So the question is, how do we minimize our impact in the landscape to help protect any type of mycorrhizal network that exists? It really comes down to, you know, sometimes, yeah, you have to till your gardens, you have to till your landscapes, but minimizing our direct impact. So, you know, when you have to plant a tree, you have to plant a tree. But unless you have any reason to cause impact to the soil, avoid any type of digging unless it's absolutely necessary. You know, luckily fungi can grow pretty rapidly and stuff. So, you know, we're trying to think of, can we remove any potentially barriers that prevent them from moving and growing? So like, even if we're thinking about putting in a utility pipe, technically, you know, we can be bifurcating that or splitting those systems up. So it's just really kind of like minimizing, yeah, they'll go up and over and around, you know, but it's like, how can we minimize our impact? So it's just trying to just be intentional with what we're doing in the landscape to help protect the soil. And that's why like a lot of agriculture producers are doing like no-till or semi-till or low-till to try to help build that soil health, which isn't just mycorrhizal connections, but that is soil organic matter and all of that stuff. A lot of hands.
Do we know what temperature they live through? They also, I believe, you died in your area.
So a question about soil temperature and solarization, can that have an impact? Yes, it can have an impact. Just, but sometimes some of those mycorrhizal connections, the depth that they go is kind of like that safe zone in the soil. So up at the surface, you can have an impact on those fungal networks up there, but some they can tolerate that heat as well. So it really depends on the type of species, the specific fungal species as well. So, but that's a good question, but it does nonetheless, heat and solarization can have an impact on it. Yeah. Aeration. So aeration can have an impact, but if you're just doing simple like core aeration, it's be pretty minimal. So yeah, like when you just do like little plug holes, I don't think it has much of an impact. So now, nonetheless, are you splitting it? Yes, but the network can be so vast. If it's present, like, you know, a lot of times we're thinking about our personal yards. There's a very good chance that mycorrhizal network is pretty low in a landscape that's disturbed. But nonetheless, if present, you know, it's that minimal, what's that minimal impact? So it'll bring more air into the soil, oxygen in the soil, but it won't have too much of an impact on it. That won't, I don't think that'll have a benefit or impact on the overall network.
How about applying fungicide to the garden plants and the lawn? Does that have an impact on that?
So how do fungicides impact mycorrhizal? Yes, it will. So it can have an impact, but again, it's like some very specific active ingredients of fungicides will have very specific interactions with very specific fungi. So, but nonetheless, it can still have an impact. So again, it comes back to IPM strategies to minimize impact. So rather than general fungicide applications, cultural practices, and then if we can't get a hold of our fungal issues in the landscape, spot treatment, minimize application. So, but that's the best strategy we can do to help preserve and protect what we have as best possible. But yes, fungicides can have an impact on it.
Farmer was, his tractor broke in the midst of destroying his trees because it's raining. And so he left it field fallow and I think it's 90 salvo or something. And all of a sudden his trees were able to handle citrus and was producing again. And I think there was some research done in the US, but I just remember thinking at that point how the interconnection of a weed and the citrus tree, you know, because for years farmers just kept mowing them because they thought it would be healthier for those trees. And it turns out that some of those weeds are beneficial.
So in a situation with citrus greening where trees, when kind of like a soil was left fallow, they were able to produce and not being less disturbed. And they were able to like kind of recover from greening, not necessarily cure. So I don't know if that has to do with mycorrhizal connections. I haven't heard that story per se, but it does have some, it makes me think of at least one story with citrus greening where find that some citrus trees, despite having greening, have done well in that still in their production when they're in proximity to oak trees. So there's something with the tannic acid associated with oak trees that can help with the citrus trees. And it's been really cool to see. But the other is, you know, if we think about mycorrhizal connection, we're thinking about optimization and uptake of nutrients. You know, we do know that one of our recommendations is when managing citrus greening, you increase your micronutrient application by 3 times. So that's like that nutrition spray that you can put on your citrus trees. I would argue that theoretically, if you have a good mycorrhizal network, that can help improve that micronutrient uptake as well, which can help manage a tree with citrus greening. But that I don't know. I'm just making that assumption from that. Yeah. Spraying the nutrients in the middle of the winter for citrus trees? It's not going to have much of an impact, no. So it's best to do it during that prime growing season, March through September for citrus trees. Yeah.
You have a lemon tree and an orange tree. One orange tree. And the orange tree is at the border of where our septic system is. And it just, I think
there's a lot of nutrients in a drain field.
Driveway, but other things growing in it. You just
ended above 11 seconds.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you could have pulling in nutrient sources, where the nutrient sources with plants, they can uptake that efficiency. Now, yeah, that's a high nutrient area. That's why also they're monitored heavily now. So because of their pollutant sources. But anyways, it's after 11. Y'all asked a lot of great questions. There is a follow-up survey. There's the link. I'll make sure I send it out to everybody. I also have this little fun QR code, so you can actually hold up your phone camera and it'll pull up a link and you can automatically go to it. So, and I will actually take the link and I'll put it in the chat box so it's clickable. But this is, well, where did it go? I'll put in the chat box. Oh, that's good. I closed it. I'll put in the chat box for everybody to be able to see. Oh no, I have it right here. I'm a goofball. So please take a minute to fill out this follow-up survey. Use that as an opportunity for us to get feedback on all of our programs, like, to help, what can we do to grow, improve programs. And as well, some of our upcoming programs, as of like earlier this week, Monday, we decided to do a Arbor Day, a Florida Arbor Day event. David A. Bear and I, he's our Ag and Natural Resource Agent. We're going to do nature walks on January 20th. In the morning, we'll be at Egan's Creek. And in the afternoon, we also are going to be doing a walk at Ralph E. Simmons Wildlife Area up in the northwest portion of the county, where we'll talk about the value of trees. And of course, that's on Florida's Arbor Day, which is January 20th, not to be confused with National Arbor Day in April. So, and then also coming up, we have our Florida Friendly Landscaping Crash Course. And next month, our Landscape Matters program is Zoe's Gardens. So it's all about Zoe's mission, that book, and how to prepare and make pollinator gardens in your landscape. But you can find all of our programs. I'm trying to put them all in one spot now rather than a unique link for every single program. So you can always go to that link. It's a bit.ly link, so it's a little more consumable, but it's nassauhorticulture.com or bit.ly Nassau Horticulture. But we have that on our county page, our Facebook group. All of our postings take you to this Eventbrite page where you can sign up and register for all of our events. So, and I want to thank everybody for joining us online. And again, I will go ahead and we will get this posted on this recording posted on our YouTube page. And I'll follow up with everybody with some content and information as follow up for this program. So thank you all. And I'll go ahead and I'll stop share because I'm getting confused looking back and forth between the screens. But anyways, anybody on here, feel free to send me any questions that you have. And thank you all for joining us today.